Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. I recently did a video talking about RMDs. RMDs are required minimum distributions, or the minimum amount that the IRS requires that someone withdraw from a traditional retirement account once they reach a specified age. These amounts are based on your account's value and a life expectancy factor as provided by the IRS tables. And an interesting comment I got on this video was that the 4% rule and the withdrawal that comes using that and RMD withdrawals are not all that dissimilar. And I thought it was an interesting comment because it was something I had never given a second thought to. So I thought it was something that it would be fun to explore. First of all, let's take a glance at the required minimum distribution table as provided by the IRS. So simply as stated before, you find your age being the age you turn this calendar year. So if you turn 74 this year, you would find the life expectancy factor that corresponds with the age of 74. In this case, that's 25.5, and you would take your account's balance as of December 31st of the previous year, divide by 25.5, and that would give you your required minimum distribution for the year. Let's talk about the 4% rule for a moment. The 4% rule, often referred to as a safe rate of withdrawal. The rule states that retirees should withdraw 4% of their total retirement savings in their first year of retirement, and then adjust that amount for inflation each year after. And if you want to break this down to basic numbers, after all, these rules are based on basic numbers, rather than displaying 4% as a percentage and decide to display it as a fraction or a decimal, you see that the number is actually fairly similar to how the RMD table starts out. Not exactly the same, but similar. And multiplying by a decimal is the same as dividing by a whole number. Algebra will forever remain the most important math class that we took in school. I can't say I got the same utility out of my calculus classes, but algebra for the win for sure. Let's run an example of how these different withdrawal strategies would play out if you utilize them in retirement. We're going to start with a required minimum distribution age of 73. Because as of the passing of the Secure 2.0 Act, for those born after January 1st, 1951, the new RMD age is 73. Let's run a hypothetical example of someone who is 73 and has a portfolio that, as of December 31st of last year, was $500,000. We'll assume that their portfolio grows at an annual rate of 8% per year. Let's see how it plays out, whether we're using RMD life expectancy factors or if we're using the 4% rule. And since the rule of 4% factors in inflation, we'll assume that long-term inflation is 2.5%. Since we did a quick example running through how to calculate RMDs, which is just taking the entire portfolio's balance as of December 31st of the previous year and dividing it by this year's life expectancy factor, and that gives you your RMD for the year, let's also run through the calculation using the 4% rule and how you make your inflation adjusted withdrawal each year going forward before we look at the table in its entirety. So if we have a portfolio of $500,000 in the first year of retirement using the 4% rule, the withdrawal in that first year would be $20,000. Assuming a 2.5% rate of inflation, we would increase that withdrawal by 2.5% the next year, or $20,500. The following year after that, again, you would increase the withdrawal by 2.5%, and the withdrawal would be $21,012.50. Again, the whole goal of the 4% rule is that you're using a safe rate of withdrawal, and in the background, your portfolio is growing by more than you're taking out on any given year. So you have a portfolio that will last a lifetime and potentially beyond. So using all of our previously stated assumptions, let's see how this scenario would play out following RMDs or the 4% rule. Let's first start with the calculations based off the 4% rule. Over the course of the retirement, withdrawals would slowly be increasing, but so too would the portfolio's value. 5 years into retirement, the annual withdrawal would be about $22,000, and the portfolio would have grown to a value of nearly $602,000. At the 10-year mark, the withdrawal would be just under $25,000, and the portfolio's value would be about $734,000. Each year, you see this ever so modest increase in your withdrawal. Continue on to 20 years into retirement, the withdrawal would be about $32,000 for the year, and the portfolio would have grown to well over $1 million. The really important thing to keep in mind with the 4% rule is that it's very conservative in nature, that it's a very safe rate of withdrawal. The statistic is something like 90% of people who follow the 4% rule actually end up with a portfolio that is larger in nominal terms when they pass away than they actually started retirement with. So that's why when I look at the 4% rule, I look at it as a wealth preservation tactic rather than a spend down plan. Now let's compare that to strictly following the required minimum distribution tables. What would your withdrawal look like each year, and what would that portfolio's value over time look like? Using the previous assumptions and the current IRS life expectancy factors, in the first year, the retiree's required minimum distribution at the age of 73 would be about $19,000. 5 years into retirement, assuming an 8% rate of return on investments, the required minimum distribution would be about $25,000, and the portfolio's total value would be just shy of $600,000. 10 years into retirement, the withdrawal would be about $36,000, and the portfolio again would have grown, this time to nearly $700,000. 20 years into retirement, the withdrawal would be about $65,000 a year, and the portfolio would still be just under $700,000. Well, we can see that the rule of 4% rate of withdrawal and the RMD withdrawal dictated by IRS tables start out very similarly. Their trajectory, however, does not continue in the same fashion. Extending out 10 or 20 years, you end up withdrawing far more using an RMD calculation than you do simply using the 4% rule and adjusting each year based on inflation. Now, if you have a traditional retirement account, you are forced to take these RMDs. They are required by the IRS. So it's not really something you can get around. If you fail to do so, there is a penalty. Outside of doing something like a Roth conversion or making a qualified charitable distribution, you have to take your RMD. Now, looking at both of these examples, I'm more inclined to favor the RMD distribution method versus the 4% rule, simply from the stance that I think the whole point of money is that you get to enjoy the money you've worked so hard to save. I think the goal of having a portfolio so robust that you can leave behind a legacy for your children or your grandchildren is an amazing goal. But I also think you should combine that with your goal of taking the time to enjoy everything you've worked so hard for. I don't believe in overly restricting your spending in your retirement years. And for some people, only increasing your withdrawal by the rate of inflation on an annual basis may seem overly restrictive. The reality is that neither of these examples are absolutely perfect. First, we have to consider that while the market may have an average annual rate of return of 10% or 8% once you factor in inflation, the odds that you're going to get a perfect 8% a year are very unlikely because the market is dynamic. It has up years and it has down years. And when it has down years, that would reduce your RMD distributions because they're based on the portfolio's total value. However, if you're following something like the 4% rule, that's going to provide a fairly stable annual withdrawal because it's a set amount that gets adjusted up each year by a rate of inflation. So let's get rid of these very clean academic examples and instead base it off the past 20 years and how the S&P actually performed and what inflation actually looked like over those years. Again, let's start with the 4% rule. Using actual inflation rates and the actual S&P performance, at the 5-year mark, our individual would be withdrawing about $22,500, and their portfolio would be worth nearly $370,000. That's quite a drop, but remember, this was 2008. At the 10-year mark, our individual would withdraw about $25,000 for the year, and their portfolio would be worth about $637,000. Fast forward to the 20-year mark, and their withdrawal would be just under $32,000, and the total portfolio's value would be about $1.4 million. Now let's talk about the RMD table. Based on actual S&P performance for the past 20 years, the first year, the first withdrawal would be about $19,000, with the starting portfolio of $500,000. In year 5, the withdrawal rate would be about $26,000, and the portfolio's value would have fallen to about $364,000. Remember, it was 2008. And because of this dramatic fall, let's talk about year 6 of this portfolio, where the RMD would fall to just $16,500. Let's move forward to year 10, where the withdrawal would be about $28,000 and the portfolio would have grown to about $643,000. Fast forward to the 20-year mark, and the RMD on this portfolio would be about $76,000, and the portfolio would be valued at about $940,000. The real-world example shows much greater variability if you're using an RMD method as a withdrawal strategy. But keep in mind that RMDs were never intended to be used as a safe rate of withdrawal or as a withdrawal strategy. It's simply based on a life expectancy factor provided by an IRS table. The overall takeaway is that the 4% rule is far more conservative in nature and would likely leave you with a more robust portfolio over time. When it comes to determining what rate of withdrawal you want to use in retirement, I think a far better method is to base it off the lifestyle you want and what your goals are in retirement. And very likely you might find that that is going to be a flexible rate of withdrawal rather than one set fixed number, because it's unlikely that your expenses this year are going to be exactly the same as your expenses next year. So I think if you can use a more variable strategy, withdraw a little bit more in up years and withdraw a little bit less in down years, maybe become a little bit more conservative when the market takes a downturn, enjoy life just a little bit more when the market takes an upturn, I think you can find you get to enjoy retirement a little bit more. So what are your goals when it comes to retirement? What withdrawal strategy are you planning on using? Leave your thoughts in a comment down below. I post new videos every single week. If you got anything at all out of this one, please give it a like. If you're new here, please consider subscribing, or if you know of someone who might get something out of this type of content, please consider sharing. I'll see you soon. Bye. Life expectancy. I can't. Percent rule for a moment. The 4% rule. And what would your portfolio, blah, blah, blah.